Hello and welcome back to another indie book review. I hope your indie August is going fantastically because mine definitely is. I recently finished another book, one that I have wanted to review for the longest time. This one is really special to me because, and I'm showing a bias here, the author was one of the first Twitter mutuals I ever made on the site. He was one of the first ones to reach out through the hashtag #amwriting community and was the one tagging me and all of this stuff at first and really helped me feel welcomed in there. So when he announced that he was self-publishing his own book, I was like, hey, I'm gonna get a review copyright, and I did. So this one is definitely gonna be a little bit of a bias on my part, and that is Tavern by Dustin Munden. I love this cover. You can't see because it's super shiny right now, but like just the door, and it's great. This is, as he described it to me, a slice of lifestyle D&D-esque high fantasy, meaning that some things are kind of a little bit hinting at a greater modern world, and to a certain extent I could definitely see that. There were certain parts where it's like, I swear I can imagine like the group of 20 something sitting around a table laughing over what silly thing they just created in a lot of cases. But this revolves around an orc protagonist named Zelnath, I think. Fantasy names are never that simple. Who tries to help and has a healing magic, so he helps all of these people that have been poisoned, only to find out that someone's really annoyed that they thwarted their sabotage attempt or their assassination plot, and he gets thrown into this greater story by this mysterious villain who wants him dead for, foiling his plans, even accidentally. And Zelnath, unbeknownst to this antagonist, is actually the head of a guild, the Blackwind Guild, who knows basically everything. And he has to use all of these contacts and all of these things he's built up in this city to fight back. I loved this premise. I love Zelnath. I think it's so rare to see an orc as the main character in a high fantasy. So often they're the villains. And here it's utterly fantastic. I wonder, I'm not sure, if the orcs aren't some kind of coding or analogy for race relations. And what I mean by that is, all orcs in here are basically darker skin for the most part. Zelnath is dark green, as your orc usually is. And the author, Dustin Munden, is a man of color. He is black. And there are certain times over the course of the story where I was like, that almost kind of feels like it's saying something more. For example, Zelnath finds himself in high courts and basically fancy people's places where he is not usually accustomed to. And you hear him talk about how he has to switch the way he speaks in order to come across as more refined, because he knows that if he speaks the way he normally does, people will look down on him. And that was very reminiscent for me of the idea of code switching that a lot of people of color in our regular modern world have to deal with, where if they speak in the way that someone from their culture normally speaks, they're looked down on, and they actually have to change the way they speak in like professional settings or whatever to look more, I don't want to say more white, but that's almost what comes to mind. So that came across to me. I also love that Zelnath is really unsure of himself. He had a very sickly childhood, and people honestly thought that his magic, his rune, was one of death and destruction, and he thought so himself, and so he's really down on himself for a lot of the story. His guildmates, his found family, more or less, is fantastic. I love the interplay. Again, it had that sort of, I can imagine a bunch of 20-somethings sitting around a table, because like there were these two characters that were dating and they would just call each other babe and that kind of stuff. So it was like, I can imagine like the actual, our modern world couple sitting there talking to each other, but like through the guise of their characters. There was also one part where I think it's called wingboarding. It's skateboarding. Essentially, there's like high fantasy skateboarding. And really the first half of the book, for the most part, was just fun, going through the city and seeing all this stuff. I mean, it was a little hard to keep up with just the sheer amount of world building, because the city that they live in, and I don't know how to pronounce it, it's that spelling, Ludad, Yadad, something like that, is a mix of cultures. So you're not even focused on just one culture in this greater universe. It's like a cajillion different cultures. So it's a lot of, oh, they're from this tribe and they're this place, and oh, this person's from this place and they have this kind of magic, and it's a little bit hard to keep up with. Usually when I read a story, my average word speed or page speed is a page and a half per minute. So in an hour sitting, I could read 90 pages. In this case, in an hour sitting, I would read like 70 pages. So still over a page a minute, still higher than what I read classics at. But it definitely took me a little bit because I got to go back and reread and make sure I had everything down. I also loved Zelnath's ability to basically knows everything about everyone, every major assassin there is. He knows their real names and where they live and what families they have. And he doesn't use it for nefarious purposes for the most part. But I loved that kind of how much it feels like he's clued in and how much he knows. Now, for the most part, at the beginning of this book, it was shaping up to be a straight 5-star. I was really excited, and at just shy of the halfway mark, you get a gigantic plot point with like stuff is going really wrong and you're like, oh crap. And I thought, okay, so now we're in the thick of it. Now we're gonna like hit the ground and go. It didn't. It almost felt like a series of short stories almost, with how much it would be like tension, 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 and pull back, and then restart, and then pull back. And so that's why it kind of felt a little bit more disjointed than one giant narrative. It kind of felt like, different D&D sessions. Like, oh, this is the part where they called it a night, and this is the part where they came back to start again. And I didn't mind it so much in the beginning, but once like the big baddie was there, and once the giant horrible thing had happened, and we're all like gearing up to face the dude, I was like ready to go. I did enjoy in one aspect, and I don't know for sure what rep this was supposed to be, but it's very much supposed to be special needs rep in one of the characters. I thought maybe autism, but I'm not sure based on some of the other actions they had. But there's definitely supposed to be like a character whose brain is wired differently than everyone else. It's supposed to be neurodiverse. I'm just not sure if it's supposed to be a very specific kind of neurodiverse, because in high fantasies, no one's using the word autism. There is also not exactly an FF romance. It's actually kind of funny. There's these two female characters that are technically, there are social structures kind of in the way of them getting together. And so they absolutely insist that it's nothing. It's just business. How dare you imagine anything more? Stop grinning, you stupid orcs. I just went to talk to her for business. And since this is the first in the series, I fully expect them to get together eventually. But I love that little bit of queer overtones. It's been a very gay month, this indie August, and I'm loving it. So, like I said, it was building up to be a 5-star. And I couldn't for life of me figure out why it wasn't feeling like a 5-star. Because it has all the stuff in it. And then I realized there's not a lot of tension over the course of the entire plot. Now, that's not to say the plot doesn't have big points. If I was to lay out the plot points for you as is, bare bones, you'd be like, wow, Margaret, that's an insanely, a lot of stuff happens and a lot of people are in danger. And that's true. The way it was written in the moment kind of drains the tension away. First of all, almost everyone, nearly everyone, really likes Zelnath. Just everyone. Obviously his guildmates, so you expect that, and his brother and that kind of stuff, but almost every single person he comes across, with 2 or 3 exceptions, likes him and wants him to live and gives him helpful advice. And it gets to the point where it's okay, it doesn't seem like you're struggling in this world at all. I mean, obviously he's struggling with his self-esteem, but nearly every other person, even if they start the interaction being annoyed at him, it'll be oh, here's this uppity nobleman who is well known for being judgmental and disliking people, and then after one conversation he likes Zelnath, and it's no, some people are just assholes. I just need someone to just be an asshole. And there's like, I think there's like one character who I was actually really interested in that like just hates orcs and won't tell you why. And he's like the only one that doesn't flat out tell you his feelings. I don't know if like everyone in this world is going to therapy or is really clued in or what, but there's a lot of just flat out saying how they feel and saying their motivations out loud. And, oh, I struggled. My father never thinks I'm good enough, and all that kind of stuff. And it's like people don't usually talk like that. They're not that open with their, emotional trauma. And so that kind of also kept away some of the emotional tension, because I'm a big fan of, the aloof character and you're not quite sure what's going on, but you can see the pain in their eyes. And then there's that one gigantic climactic scene where they break down and finally admit, this is why. People were saying this is why when you first met them. So it's like, eh. Also, the fact that Zelnath uses a lot of his contacts and a lot of his information to diffuse situations, he also is very forgiving. Like, he gives a lot of second chances and helps a lot of people out. And no matter how many times somebody else in the narrative will be like, that's dangerous, they could backstab you, nothing really bad ever comes of it, with like maybe one exception. So after a while, you're like, yeah, give them a second chance. It's literally never burned you before. There's not a lot of tension to be like, oh, will they actually take this second chance? Will they actually be a better person? Or will they fall back on their ways? You very rarely see anyone falling back on their ways. So to that extent, I couldn't make it a solid 5 stars, because it's like I wanted to be more nervous. I wanted to be more wondering what was going on in people's heads or the reason they were doing stuff. And the reason it's not lower than 4 stars, because I thought about that, is that when there was serious tension, that big bad thing that happens just shy of the halfway mark, it's awesome. And when there is that character that's like, I have this reasoning thing, but I'm not going to tell you, or they do show something that they have a superior ulterior motive, and you're like, oh crap, those were done well. So Destin has the ability to do that well. It's just, it was so rarely done that it was like, I can basically be guaranteed that literally any conflict he comes across with another person will be solved in like a conversation, with like 2 exceptions. And that kind of took away the tension, but I guess to a certain extent, you also have to accept that that's just the slice of life aspect. In a slice of life story, there's not a ton of conflict. It's not supposed to be super tense. And so maybe it was just the weird mashup of the 2 that didn't work for me, because it didn't have the tension that a story with the plot points that it has should have, if that makes any sense. However, I am still intrigued to continue reading, and that's probably one of the big reasons that I didn't drop it down to a 3-star, was because for me, if I want to continue the series, it's a minimum of a 4-star. So it's a little bit backwards logic, but if I want to continue this, then it has to be a minimum of a 4-star. And if I want to continue it, then it makes it a 4-star, because there's something in it that makes me want to continue. But in general, I'd like to see the stakes actually come across emotionally. I'd like to see some more emotionally complex characters that don't just, that aren't so woke that they can tell you right away what's their deal is. But beyond that, I am very happy that I read this. It is awesome to see a person of color writing a nice, chunky, high fantasy D&D style. It's nice to see an orc be the main character instead of, a brutish antagonist for once. Zell was very likable. He was very, relatable, in that he has a lot of serious self-esteem issues that I think a lot of people can connect with. The guild was very, very warm and fuzzy and had all the great found family aspects that you want from that. The banter between them was fantastic. I just wish there was a little bit more bad stuff, I guess. But I did enjoy it. 4 stars. So if you are an indie author and looking for a review, please send me an email. I'll have my email down in the description below, as long as with my review policy, and be sure to get that a quick read through when you send it. I have been enjoying Indie August so much so far, and we're like barely a week in, but there's just something so nice about being all indie focused and just loving the indie community. And I will definitely be continuing with this, so be on the lookout for even more indie content. I'm gonna do an in-depth video on my review policy coming up soon, which will probably be really long, but necessary, as well as some other indie stuff. I'm going to try to get as many indie books read this month as I can, with one exception. But beyond that, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.